I want to take you to the England of the 18th century. The most famous writer of that time is Dr. Samuel Johnson, the Shakespeare of literary criticism. Now, legend has it that Dr. Johnson has read every single book that's ever been published in the world. Now, fast forward to the 21st century. We are now living at a time when we have another man who claims to have read every single book that has ever been published. That man is Steve Donoghue. Steve Donoghue is the Dr. Johnson of YouTube. In this video, I'm going to try so hard to guess the 10 books that he might not have read. Would you like to watch me struggle? Would you like to watch me struggle real hard? All my struggles coming up right now. Hello, I am Samuel Durham, and if you're one of the 2 people on YouTube who have never heard of Steve Donoghue, well, let me tell you who he is. Steve Donoghue is a booktuber. He publishes about 3 brand new videos per day. He's a professional literary critic and writer based in Boston in the United States. And he has read every single book that's ever been published, or so he claims. Right? Now, the purpose of this tag is for me to guess all the books that he might not have read. Now, this idea was dreamed up by Matthew at Mayberry BookClub. This is an original tag from Matthew. So Matthew, well done. This is a fantastic idea for an original tag. I'm going to have a lot of fun trying to guess the 10 books, but I am struggling. This is a real struggle because Julian Barnes once said, right? Julian Barnes, the great English novelist, Booker Prize winner, once said that John Updike, one of the most prolific novelists and essayists of the last century, Julian Barnes said, nobody in the world has read every single thing that John Updike has published. But I bet, guess who? Steve Donoghue must have read every single thing that John Updike has published. So now you can understand the struggle that I'm going to have in trying to guess the 10 books that Steve Donoghue would not have read. Now, before we go on, we need to have a few rules because that's what Steve Donoghue said last night. Now, I think we need to have some parameters. Steve Donoghue has said that he reads within 17 categories. So in fairness to Steve, I'm only going to pick books that would have been published in the United States and also within the 17 categories that he prefers. So let's just have a look at what he had to say about those 17 categories so we all know what we have to pick.
And there's like 16 categories and a great many of them are nonfiction, and there you will learn the best biographies that I read in 2019, the best general nonfiction, the best science, the best nature, the best history. Those categories that I mentioned, there are about 16 or 17, about 20 categories of books that I read. Debut fiction, works in translation, science fiction, fantasy, mystery, kids, picture books, YA, romance, fiction, general interest, nonfiction, science, nature, history, biography, military history. There's a list. And
so the first book that I think Steve Donoghue would not have read is Helen Fielding's debut novel, Cause Célèbre. Now, I'm a big fan of Bridget Jones' Diary. I'm sure you might have read those books as well. But how many people have read Cause Célèbre? It's a satire. Now, I have a good feeling that Steve Donoghue would not have read that novel. I want to ask you a question. Does my bum look big in this? See, this is the type of question that tyrannizes me every morning. Yes, every morning. This is one of the biggest hits from the late 1990s. Quintessentially British, funny, a bit like Bridget Jones' Diary. But I don't think Steve Donoghue would have read this. Steve Donoghue, have you read Arabella Ware's novel? I don't think so. My third book is a memoir by Jean-Luc Guo. I hope I got the pronunciation right. Now, we all know how much Steve Donoghue loves to mock the Booker Prize. He always says, oh, the Booker Prize judges, they never read any of those books. Most of them can't read and all that. It's fun, right? Maybe it's not all true, although this year Booker Prize was an absolute fiasco. It was an absolute mess. And one of the judges was, guess who? This lady. This is a novelist. Now, this is her memoir of growing up in China. And I have a good feeling that Steve Donoghue hasn't read this memoir. Now, we know that Steve Donoghue reads contemporary novels, but he hates most of them, right? But guess what? I'm going to pick this one, Pretty Taneja's We That Are Young. Now, this is supposed to be a modern-day version of King Lear, set in India. This is actually not a good novel. I didn't like it. I was looking forward to it, but didn't like it at all. I have a pretty good feeling that Steve Donoghue would not have read it. Another novel, Towel Head by Alicia Ariane. This is about a 13-year-old girl who's half Middle Eastern and half American. And I like this novel. It's a coming-of-age story. And it was made into a film adapted and directed by Alan Ball, who got an Oscar for American Beauty. But I have a feeling that Steve Donoghue would not have read this. Ian Sinclair's Lights Out for the Territory is a quintessentially British book by a quintessentially British writer. Now, I know that Steve Donoghue reads a lot of British writers, but I don't think he would have read Ian Sinclair. Maybe not this particular book. And even if he read it, I don't think he would like Ian Sinclair's prose. It is maximalist, a bit like Faulkner, Cormac McCarthy, and he hates them, right? So I'm pretty sure that Steve Donoghue wouldn't have read this book. Now, with the next book, I had a bit of help from my neighbor, Audrey. Now, she watches a lot of YouTube videos. She knows Steve Donoghue. So I asked her to make one contribution. I asked her, what is that one book you think Steve Donoghue would not have read? Now, if you watch my videos regularly, you would know that Audrey reads just one genre, erotica. She loves E.L. James, right? And Sylvia Day, and that whole lot. She loves them. So Audrey thinks that Steve Donoghue would have read 50 Shades of Grey and the two novels that followed, but she doesn't think that Steve would have read Grey, which is a story told from the point of view of Christian Grey. So what do you think, Steve? Have you read this? Be honest. Don't be embarrassed. It's us, your fellow booktubers. Just confess. If you read it, tell us. The next book that I'm convinced that Steve Donoghue would not have read is Eve Ensler's memoir, The Apology. Now, this is a follow-up to her 2013 memoir, In the Body of the World. Now, if you remember, Eve Ensler was famous in the 1990s for writing the Vagina Monologues. Yes, I said it, the Vagina Monologues. It was a huge phenomenon all across the world. She's a really good playwright and writer. And then this latest memoir, The Apology, relates to her relationship with her father. It's another really urgent book, but I'm going to take a risk and say this is a book that Steve Donoghue might not have read. This Divided Island by Samantha Subramanian. Now, this is a book that was nominated for the Samuel Johnson Prize in 2015. This is a great piece of reportage about the Sri Lankan Civil War. Samantha Subramanian goes there, especially to parts of northern Sri Lanka where I used to live as a child, and it brought back a lot of memories for me. And he is one of the big superstars of South Asian non-fiction writing, and I'm not sure Steve Donoghue would have read Samantha Subramanian. He's a big player to watch in the next 10 to 20 years. Next up is The Cage by Gordon Weiss, another book about the Sri Lankan Civil War. Now, this war, for lots of reasons, means a lot to me, and this is a brilliant book. Anyone who wants to understand the history of Sri Lanka and the war should read this one. Gordon Weiss is a really good Australian writer, highly controversial book. And Steve Donoghue has talked in the past about a lot of countries in Africa, but I haven't heard him talk that much about Sri Lanka. So I'm pretty sure he hasn't read this particular book, which is a masterpiece in writing. And finally, there's another book that I am certain that Steve Donoghue might not have read, is Barbara Kiesling's masterpiece, How to Make Love All Night. All the secrets about the male multiple orgasm. I'm pretty sure he hasn't read it. Thank you so much for Matthew at Mayberry BookClub for creating this brilliant tag. I think we should all use this tag to pay tribute to Steve Donoghue, who really is one of the best booktubers of all time. He's the booktuber that I watch regularly, consistently. I get a lot of value out of his videos, even when the videos sometimes go on for 30 minutes, 40 minutes. They are packed with a lot of value. I learn a lot from it. And I think BookTube is a richer place with Steve in it. Now I'm going to tag 10 booktubers. I'm going to tag Jennifer Helinek at insert literary pun here. Now, one of the best BookTube videos that I've seen this year came in July with Steve and Jennifer talking for about 38 minutes. And the whole video was packed with value. It was entertaining. It was informative. They were talking about Kindle. And I think there was partly they were talking about the Bible and about lending books. How Steve said that he would never lend books to anyone. He would rather give books as a gift. And I thought that was really entertaining. And I think Jennifer Helinek will be fantastic to do this tag because she could guess the 10 books that Steve might not have read because she has spent some time with Steve. The other person I like to tag is Alba at Ciriela, who lives in Puerto Rico. I also want to thank Melanie at Melanie's Book Adventures and Peg at the History Shelf and Olive at a Book Olive. And I'm going to tag Eric Carl Anderson, Matthew Shurappa, Adam Durant, Brian at Book Wanting, and David Murphy. I know Adam Durant doesn't make any videos anymore, but Adam, it would be great if you could just come and give this gift of a video to one of the great legends of YouTube, the Dr. Johnson of YouTube, Steve Donoghue.
What nonfiction book changed your life in a minor or major way? Why and how? Unfortunately, none. None have done that, but I understand the gist of the question. It's just, changed my life? I guess there have been plenty of nonfiction books that changed my life because before I read them, I didn't have a small check of money. And then after I read them, I did get a small check of money because I wrote about them. But changed my life in the sense of, oh man, a light on the horizon, that sort of thing. No book has ever done that. No book ever will. I don't reserve that to books. I reserve that to real life. So maybe I'm a little bit of a worse reader than Samuel would like. He refers to me as the Dr. Johnson of BookTube. I have to assume that isn't a reflection of my brilliance, but rather that he has some sort of insider knowledge about my history with scrofula. But anyway, this again is going to be Steve pulling a non-answer, and this is gratitude. Which nonfiction book from the teens made you feel grateful for what you have already? And I already do. I had a health issue, and I had the kind of health issue where if you come out the other end of it, you never lose that sense of gratitude. Never. Not for 1 second of one day. I might bellyache. I bellyache plenty. But I am blindingly, radioactively grateful for everything, every minute of every day. And I don't need a book to help me with that. The twist that I'll put on it, just to salvage it a little, is that I'm grateful for books. I'm grateful that I live in a leisured country. I'm grateful that I live in a free era, in a time where I can actually make my living from reading books. So I'm grateful for